the senior editors at the Journal of Ecology and a reader at King's College London. I'm delighted today to welcome Professor Michelle Leishman to speak with us. Michelle has been named as the Journal of Ecology Eminent Ecologist for 2021. Each year, the editors at the Journal of Ecology honour an ecologist in our Eminent Ecologist series. These individuals are hugely influential within their fields and have made outstanding contributions, not just to the Journal of Ecology, but to ecology in general. So welcome, Michelle. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. It's lovely to be here, even if we are thousands of kilometres apart.
As a brief introduction for those of you who don't know Michelle, Michelle's a professor at Macquarie University in Sydney in Australia, where she leads up the Plant Invasion and Restoration Ecology Lab. Her research focuses on understanding the success of invasive plants, plant and vegetation responses to climate change, and plant conservation and adaptation under climate change. So Michelle, amongst all your various research streams and things that you've done, it's always quite interesting to know how someone even got into ecology and then perhaps even got into the aspects of ecology that they're working on. So I was wondering if you could just give us a brief insight into that.
Sure. So I guess, well, probably when I started at uni, I didn't even know what an ecologist was. So I think that, so I enrolled in a science degree, and I knew that I wanted to be a biologist. And the reason that I knew that I wanted to be a biologist was from David Attenborough. So, you know, I watched Life on Earth whenever it came out, 1979, I think, and I was just a school student, and that just completely opened my eyes to what an amazing planet we live on. So David Attenborough is the reason that I'm an ecologist. And so I knew I wanted to be a biologist, and I've always loved wild places and, you know, bushwalking and cross-country skiing and all of those types of things. And I think I just fell into plants. So, you know, I had a really good lecturer in first year that made me think, oh, plants are much more interesting than I thought they were. And it just kind of progressed from there. So I got lucky with, you know, and life is like sliding windows or whatever, isn't it? Windows of opportunity and stuff. So, you know, I happened to go to Macquarie University, and Mark Westerby was there, and I did my honours and then eventually a PhD with Mark. And that was another sort of pivotal moment that have changed the trajectory of my career. So, yeah, so I think it's the inspiration of the planet itself, and now it's that the planet's in trouble. And that's the sort of work and the focus that I have now is much more, you know, climate change adaptation and urbanisation and, you know, meeting threatening processes and what we can do to manage them. So, yeah, that's where I started.
Yeah, thanks, Michelle. It's funny, actually. I wonder how many people could cite David Attenborough as an inspiration. I remember in high school, I think I saw The Private Life of Plants that came out. I don't know if you ever saw that series, but it blew my mind. I was always into plants, but I think that just, yeah, that confirmed it for me. So yeah, I reckon single-handedly he's influenced, you know, more people than many other people could lay claim to. So he's an amazing man. Yeah, and still going at 95 or whatever he is. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And also getting more into global change as well as sort of just.
Yeah, that's right. So now my kids watched, you know, I don't know what the last season was called, the Extinction Crisis one. And, you know, it's interesting to see that he's influenced multiple generations. Yeah.
Yeah, it's going to leave a massive gap when he does leave us. Great. So you've sort of answered my next question. I was going to ask about who or what inspired you. But I think we've got that. So it sounds like the love of the bush and the outdoors, as well as perhaps those amazing documentaries.
Yeah. I think that's the root of it all, basically. So and Australia has such an amazing biodiversity. So you don't really realise until you go to other places just how lucky we are. The landscapes are so fantastic, the biodiversity is so amazing, and you know, and I did a postdoc in the UK for a couple of years, and so much of the ecology that we read, so many of those classic papers a succession and old forest meadows and, you know, all sorts of things like that. And it's quite alien to the landscapes that we're used to in Australia and other parts of the Southern Hemisphere. So I think for ecologists to travel, to see different places, to see different landscapes, to understand that the processes can be quite different in different places is really important too. So, yep. Yeah. I think being Australian is part of what was, you know, the part of the journey to be an ecologist as well. It's interesting though. I've been thinking about this a little bit, partly from writing the blog, I think, about wild and I think when I was an undergraduate and even a PhD and early postdoc, we did actually think in ecology in terms of wild places that they were untouched by human management. But and in Australia, you know, we think of big areas of wilderness, but increasingly we recognise actually that's not the case. The landscapes have been managed by people for a very long time, and in Australia for, you know, 65,000 years of continuous Aboriginal occupation. And so that it's interesting to think about landscapes and how they have been managed. You know, we tended to think we used to think it was either they were human modified or they weren't. But actually all of our landscapes are human modified. It's just to different extents. Yeah.
No, it is interesting reflecting on those sorts of things. I mean, we both work on invasive species, so I think often with that it forces you to reflect on things. So, you know, like in Australia is the dingo, you know, yes. The Australian wild dog. How that was introduced by humans quite a long time ago, but you know, is some, I don't know if you have reflected on that much, Michelle, about when things become native, or do they always stay exotic, or?
Yeah. And I think, and we're also beginning to recognise a greater acceptance, I guess, of exotic species, that they're not all bad. Some of them, many of them have been here for a long time and don't really have a negative impact. And we're just going to have to get used to them anyway, because we can't possibly get rid of them. But the difference, but that's right. When you look in a European landscape, neobiota versus, you know, like it seems to me a very big merging. It's much less merged in Australia because we are an island and our flora is so completely different. So we can tell the weeds just by looking at them because they look different. But we're gradually beginning to accept that we can't get rid of them all. Many of them don't have a negative impact, and it's just a few key transformer species that we really need to focus on.
I don't know if you want to touch on some of the work that you've looked at within invasive species, or what you're thinking about at the moment, or if you're actively working on them at the moment, because you've obviously done quite a lot in the past, looking at sort of how environmental change has facilitated them, looking at their functional traits, which I've drawn on a lot in my own work. Just thinking about.
So I guess I think invasive species is the main thing that I will be remembered for, I guess. I think it's a very, you know, it's a big block of work sort of mid-career, I guess. But the funny thing was that I actually my honours degree was on nutrient enrichment and invasion in the Sydney sandstone flora. So the soils are really infertile. And so as soon as you add a little bit of nutrient, and all the plants are super adapted to those low nutrient soils, and you add a little bit of nutrient and the weeds take off. And it's incredibly obvious, right? So as a teenager walking in the bush, you can go from an area where there's stormwater outlets that have put nutrient-rich stormwater runoff, and it's all weedy, and you can move 3 steps away from where the runoff is, and it's native species, right? So like the pattern is, you'd have to be blind not to see the pattern. You don't have to be a clever ecologist to know what's going on. But so I quantified that for honours degree, and then I did lots of other things for a decade or more before coming back to it, and quantifying it more and looking at the traits, and a lot of it is about the capacity for fast growth and having those traits, those leaf level traits like high specific leaf area or high nitrogen content and high assimilation rates, all of those things that enable the plants to really take off when the resources are available. it's a combination of the nutrient enrichment and the and those traits that enable the exotic species to do super well. And it was just, it's just a very clear pattern in the low fertility soils. You can go, and the other thing that I really liked about working in that particular community is that you could go from understanding the patterns and looking at the correlations. So the field studies, see the patterns in the field, do their data analysis in terms of traits and understanding the correlations, and then test them with experiments and doing manipulative experiments. And so you complete the circle. And that's, I find that sort of ecology really satisfying, to go from the field studies and the patterns that you see in the field, and then developing the hypotheses and then testing them with manipulative experiments. It's like that's the gold standard for me of ecology. It's super fun. And when you nail it with the manipulative experiments, you go, yeah, I've got this. I understand what's going on now. So yeah. And doing those experiments, carting water out into the field or building fences and things. They're hard work, but super satisfying. So, yes.
And most of your experiments are done in the field, or do you do sort of a mix? Do you do like some microcosm work as well?
Yeah, a bit of a mix. I think probably more glasshouse experiments, particularly these days, than field experiments. Some things you just can't do in the glasshouse. Physical disturbance is a good example. You can't, you have to do that in the field. It's often difficult. I think with plants in glass houses, you need to be mindful of the size of the pots and what sort of soil material you're growing them in. And if you can do it in the field, I think it's much better. But it's hard work sometimes, and there's some things that you just can't manipulate in the field to the level that you want to. So yeah, I think the dream life is to mix it up, hey, to do field experiments, glasshouse experiments, field studies, desktop analyses. If you can do all of those things, then you get the variety and you get those different threads of evidence and pull them all together into the one story.
Yeah, it's very compelling, isn't it, when they all come together, and that story does, you sort of almost are examining it from multiple sides, and then you sort of know that it is actually solid. If I can hit it from all these sides and it still looks the same, then probably what I'm looking at is a real thing. No, that's cool. I was just wondering, I don't know if you want to just reflect. I was just thinking, field experiments are great for all the reasons you give, not least for actually getting out into these places which inspire many of us. But I'm guessing quite a lot of your work has been done on public land. So have you had sort of challenges getting approval from managers to do, because some of these global change experiments, we are actually harming the environment, and maybe we're facilitating invasive species by doing the various actions. So I don't know if you've had to overcome some of that, or
I guess that the first manipulative experiments that I did in the field were part of my PhD, and that was at a CSIRO field station. So it's a field station. It doesn't exist anymore, unfortunately. It was called Lake Mere, and it was a property where they had enclosures of different stocking rates of sheep and kangaroos. So it was a very basic field station in terms of accommodation, like container sheds, but there was air conditioning and a kitchen, and which, if you're in Western New South Wales, you really need air conditioning. So it was an ex-grazing property. So there's plenty of land, and it was challenging in terms of, I had to take a little team out there, and we had to build fences. And what do PhD students know about building fences? But we all learned a little bit about building fences and, carting water around. And it was challenging. And when I put that first experiment in to do, it was about testing the role of seed size for seedlings in establishing under drying conditions. And it was dry. It was seriously dry, and it was hot. So it was November. It took me a little longer to get out into the field than I hoped. we started off, it was 35 degrees. By the time we finished, it was 39 degrees. It just got a little bit hotter, maximum temperature every day. So we'd have to, you know, be out there at dawn, do all the work, come in by 10 o'clock, lie under the air conditioning, go back out again at 3 or 4, you know, to monitor everything. So, you know, that was a bit of a baptism by fire, but, you know, still, you know, super rewarding in the long run. Probably didn't think so at the time. But so, you know, grazing properties and things like that, if the owners are good, I think it says a lot for field stations. We don't have as many long-term particular field stations as I would like. That's, you know, CSIRO's withdrawing the universities. It's hard for them to invest in these things these days. We're lucky at Macquarie Uni, we have a reserve, a bushland reserve that I could do manipulative experiments in. That was a great opportunity too. But yes, with invasive species, you can't let them get through to seed. You can only do seedling work. As soon as they flower, you have to pull them out. So yeah, it can be challenging to do field experiments and to get the permission and to find the right site, which is why we resort to glass houses quite a lot.
Yeah, no, it sounds like it's all of these things. I recently learned an expression. There's apparently type 1 fun, which is fun when you're doing it, and then there's type 2 fun, which is fun after you've done it. So I think a lot of this fieldwork, or anything where you just, you know, just the nature of the replication we have to do, everything becomes boring. So whatever, so it's yeah, I just think I think fieldwork is often type 2 fun. It sounds like it was, I mean, a bit of serendipity in many ways, Michelle, that you kind of, because obviously you've worked with Mark Westerby for several years, and so that sounds like it was almost a bit serendipitous that you sort of overlapped with him or happened to go to Macquarie where he was based, and then obviously he's a bit of a giant in plant ecology himself. So as well as sort of your experience at Macquarie, which is obviously positive as you're there now as well, have there been other particular moments in your career where that have been particularly pivotal, that you think that, you know, on reflection, oh yeah, that did take me in a different direction, whether that's a collaborator or a conference or an overseas research stay?
So I think, well, I did work with animals for a while. I did a research project as an honours student on animals, and then I worked at CSIRO in Canberra with their vertebrate pest group. I did a lot of mouse trapping, which was great, but that made me decide that I never want to work with animals ever again. And I'm through and through a plant person. So I think that's kind of pivotal. Like, it was a extended pivot, but you know, it was definitely, while I understand that ecosystems are full of interacting species of all different levels, it's the green ones that I particularly care about. I guess the decision to work on invasives was a big change from what I'd been doing, which was seed size and comparative plant ecology work. And that was, I guess I've just always been interested in them, but I also started to go to weeds conferences specifically, rather than just ecological conferences. And I met Dave Richardson at one of them, at one in Perth. He came across as a plenary speaker at an Australasian Weeds conference, you know, and got chatting to Dave. And we've done a bit of stuff together. I've done, I think, probably the dream Australian Research Council grant for me was one that enabled us to travel to look at populations of invasive species in Australia, New Zealand, and South Africa. And, you know, it doesn't really get much better than being able to travel around to all these beautiful places and even if you are working on weeds. So that was probably something that's, you know, set me on a particular path, as well as meeting Dave and starting to think a lot more about invasive species. Yeah, it's hard to know. I mean, it's not like a career path. I mean, how many people actually know where they're going to be in 20 years and set that path? I don't think it works like that. It certainly doesn't work like that for me. It's a bit just making sure that you've got the right things in place for when the opportunities happen. So I don't want to make it sound like you can just bumble along and get lucky, but the idea that you can actually very deliberately set a path and you'll reach that final destination in 20 years' time seems a bit abstract to me.
Yeah.
It's a bit of a mix of luck and opportunity.
Yeah. And also all of the sort of family life considerations. It's not like we, live and work in a vacuum as well. So
and that's true, because my first child was born in 1996, and then I moved, and then I've been doing work in urban bushland since then, because it's in Sydney, right outside my back door. I don't have to go very far to do field work. So yes, family life constrains you in many ways. You can't go to the international conferences and do all of that stuff, and distant field work is pretty much out of the question, or it was for me. I mean, before I had kids, I did 2 field seasons in Antarctica. I'm not going to be able to do that again. So, yeah. So life's full of little interesting things.
Wow, that sounds amazing. Going to Antarctica, was that a plant-based project, or were you?
Yeah, so the first one is, so my partner's an Antarctic geomorphologist and a quaternary person. So, he was going on lots of trips to Antarctica, so I didn't want to be left out. So I wrote a research grant to go as well, and that was to look again at nutrient enrichment, but it was quite a different story, because of course there's not there's just lichen and mosses in the Australian Antarctic Territory. Everywhere except on the peninsula, there's no vascular plants. The pattern that people had seen but never quantified was that where the seabirds come into nest and then they crap everywhere and bring their nutrients in is where you get growth of mosses and lichens.
Right.
So the pattern had been observed, but nobody really quantified it very well. So I spent a season, wrote a grant, was successful, took a fieldie with me. My husband, who wasn't married to me at the time, but he was down there in a different part of the same area, so we'd come into the station and see each other occasionally. But it was that was a great summer season, and we showed that the lichens was entirely tied to the nutrient levels, but the mosses were not. That was about water availability and not about the nutrients. And then I had a second season there where I essentially was a fieldie for a deep camp expedition to a place called Bunga Hills. So the purpose of it was to do was glaciology basically, but I did a lot of human impact work there. So there's abandoned stations and evidence of human impact. So we mapped all of that, and we mapped the birds and we mapped the vegetation, just because we were walking across the hills and doing it in a grid, very systematic way. So and those papers, because I came home and had children and got distracted, those papers actually came out in a special issue only last year. So you can always dust out data from long ago, remember fantastic field sites and write them up eventually.
Oh, amazing. That sounds incredible. So was that post PhD that you were doing that?
Yeah.
Yeah,
post PhD. Huh. Yeah. So in between, well, actually just before I submitted my thesis, I had a little tiny suspension. So just at the end of a PhD, and then between postdocs. Yeah.
Oh, amazing.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna have to dig up that special issue, Michelle. And, I guess that's one of the nice things actually working in Antarctica. It's unlikely that anyone's going to scoop you, I suppose. So
yeah, that's right. That's right. Hardly anyone's ever been there since. So
yeah, amazing. That's kind of dream expeditionist type of thing. So coming to, I guess, sort of the end of our chat, I was just wondering if you could give us I don't know, or whether you'd like to give us a bit of information or excite us about things that you're currently working on or currently thinking about.
For the last couple of years, I've done probably the last decade a pivot more to climate change adaptation, climate change impacts and adaptation. So we've done a bunch of experimental work in glass houses in particular, because we have very good glasshouse facilities at Macquarie, and we can manipulate carbon dioxide and as well as temperature. So quite a lot of impact work, and also the interaction of invasive species and climate change. So does climate change facilitate invasive success of plants? And we've done that using manipulative experiments as well as a lot of bioclimatic modelling work. So that sort of work. I've also done. So we have a research hub or a research node at Macquarie that was in association with the state government Department of Environment. So they're not called that, but that's what they are. And it was a node for a biodiversity node. It was led by Leslie Hughes, that many people watching or listening will know Leslie. She's very well known. And that was a really great experience. That really changed the way I think about ecology as well, in that it was very hand in hand with policy and practitioners. So it was a co-created, co-designed project. Sometimes the Department of Environment staff are embedded at Macquarie. It was great, and we did produce a bunch of papers, research papers, but we also produced a bunch of resources and tools. So we built the Weed Futures website, which you can look at multiple species and look at areas of climatic suitability across Australia, and that's used for weed management work by all state agencies now. We did tools for choosing the right sort of sites for threatened species management under climate change. We did a whole bunch of different things, and that was really fun. It was really great to work, not just to write a paper and go, oh, so this can be used for management of this species or something, but to actually make sure that would be the outcome right from the very beginning. So a lot of climate change adaptation work, which has been great, and with really great colleagues for the last couple of years, Leslie Hughes and Rachel Gallagher and Linda Beaumont, a bit of a dream team for a while. So we actually got an award for that biodiversity node, a national level award for non-commercial collaboration, it was called. And so there was all of us at the table, we're all women, and we got up, and most of the rest of the business stuff were men, and we got up, and to refer to us as the ladies as we strolled up to receive our award. It was, it's been a very productive relationship with those female colleagues. So, and then more recently, I've been doing work in urban greening. So, again, that's a change for me, in that when I was an undergrad or a young postdoc, I used to think that urban areas were pretty boring and didn't have anything of conservation value. But the world's a very urbanized place and is becoming more urbanized. And if we just ignored the urban areas and thought that the interesting biology happened elsewhere, we'd be missing a whole lot of very important things. So we've been working on with the horticultural industry to understand, to build tools basically so that we choose the right sort of species under climate change so that our urban green spaces are resilient. And that's been fun, again, working with a bunch of different people and doing a whole lot of different things, from bioclimatic modelling to running species through their paces in the glasshouse, torturing them with heat and drought and things like that. So lots of different, and putting living labs in local government areas across Australia to test things about vegetation structure and biodiversity outcomes. So that's been a good project too, and again, it's very because it's very applied and supported by industry. It's a lot of it is not about the research papers. Again, it's about the resources and the tools that we produce, and whether we can change the way that things are done so that we can make sure that the right sort of horticultural species go in, that we have quality urban green space. And we've built an online tool which will come out in October for public release, and that supports species selection under climate change. So yeah, I guess my career has gone well and truly from writing a lot of research papers to actually spending a lot of time talking to industry and government and helping to produce resources and outcomes that will give us good biodiversity and conservation outcomes.
That's amazing, Michelle. That sounds incredible. Like just that because as you say, I mean, you've done some, you know, really fundamental research, and now this is all quite applied and clearly really impactful. So, which is what, you know, a lot of us, as well as being inspired by David Attenborough, we are all also, I think, typically inspired to save the world. So, you know, to save the world. So it's kind of, I imagine it's quite gratifying to be working at that things where you can put your research into practice.
No, I really enjoy it. I think I think there's always a bit of a tension and between those high impact papers in Nature and Science and things that we all really secretly do want to have, and working with industry and producing, you know, resources and tools and evidence base that can be used for management. So they're not particularly compatible, but they were quite different in the past, quite separate in the past. I think when I was an undergraduate, they're completely separate, but now they're much more melded together. I don't think it's just me getting older and my career trajectory. I think it's actually many, you know, young researchers are the same. They're interested in doing the applied work. They're interested in working and having positive outcomes. And it's not just about producing more papers and more citations.
So you don't see it as so much attention. I mean, you could, like, on one side think, oh, there's some sharp trade-offs here if I'm not spending my time, you know, working my research paper, but you see them as more compatible than other people might.
Yeah, I think I think it's improving in that sense because the way that we're being measured is not just about the research metrics, but also increasingly about the impacts that we have beyond those research metrics. And so we have that with our, you know, our Australian Research Council, the way that we, you know, we have this whole scheme about looking at departments and disciplines, and they're all quantified and compared and so on. It used to all be about the metrics. Now it includes other impacts. So that helps. That it reduces the tension, basically. Yeah. You can have impacts in multiple ways.
Yeah, certainly sort of in the UK as well, impact-based work is really valued, and so that maybe that's changing a bit too. So I've got that that prompted so many questions, Michelle, so I need to pick carefully about what we've got left. So just a quick one then. So often people are wanting to do this, work closer with industry or work closer with government departments because they want their research to, you know, be helpful. So, but often, you know, we're used to working with other scientists and with other researchers. So how did you bridge that gap? Or was it like a government funded thing that a call was put up and then you're like, oh, we should go and speak to, you know, how did all of that come about? Was this years of liaison on your behalf?
So yes, there was a you know, a tender put out or whatever, a research contract put out that we applied for and that we got, which was for the biodiversity node. But we were in a good position to apply for that because we knew many of the people. So I had served as on the New South Wales Scientific Committee, which is the committee that assesses species and populations and communities, you know, under the IUCN guidelines for their threat status. So, you know, I worked there for years, 6 years or something, maybe 8, I can't remember, multiple different terms, and was the chair of that scientific committee for a number of years. And Leslie was before me as well. So we knew people in the department. They knew us, they felt confident with us as individuals. We knew the system, how the threatened, how the listing process works and so on. So I think it's it's about getting to know people. I think it like much of what we do when the successful endeavours are based on individual relationships with people. So yeah. So how do you get your foot in the door if you want to do those sorts of things? I think find a researcher who has those networks and collaborations and join that network. Probably the best advice.
And then one other question before we sort of wrap up. So, or two more. I'll limit myself. So just your reflection on your dream team. So, I mean, many of us who are working in ecology or biology or science, if you're female or from other groups, there tends to be a minority. So I wonder, and that is clearly a dream team. I know the work of all of those women that you mentioned, and they're all amazing in their own right. And I guess if you bring them all together, it's quite incredible. So how do you, have you got any reflections? Because that is quite unusual. Do you think it was just circumstance that happened at Macquarie, or was there some structural things or some leadership, that other places could try to emulate to get similar sorts of, well, not necessarily just female, but just some really, effective, positive sort of collaborative work among PIs?
Yeah, I've thought a lot about what makes university or research environments special. What is it that gives it that extra wow factor or X factor or whatever? And I think the department that I've spent most of my career in, biological sciences at Macquarie, is a great department for many reasons. It's had female leaders for years. One of the early department heads was a woman, and we had, I've been head of department. The woman before, the previous head of department was female. The one before that was female. So role models are very important to bring young women through. But it's not just about women. It's about being inclusive and collegial and creating those spaces. And this particular department has worked hard to do that, to make it a nice place to be, to try to get those interactions happening, to bring young researchers through, to join them into networks and provide a supportive working space. So I think it's about leadership. I think it's about the leaders making the right atmosphere so that people want to join networks, so that they support each other, so that they don't see it as a trade-off of their time to look after someone else, but actually it's a mutual benefit. So yeah, but fundamentally it comes down to the culture that's led from the top.
Thanks. And then finally, Michelle, I mean, you've given some sort of, I think, indirectly lots of really useful advice and reflections through this, but do you have any particular advice for ECRs today? And, I mean, maybe even thinking about what's been happening in the last 18 months where, the possibility for lab work and field work has been heavily restricted.
And it has been tough, really tough for people, young researchers and PhD students, not being able to get into the labs and go out in the field and stuff. I do feel very sorry for them. Older researchers have a backlog of papers that we'd like to write up, and being forced not to create more data is probably a good thing. I think so my advice is always find yourself some good mentors. Not just one mentor. You can have a mentor for teaching and a mentor for research and a mentor for, whatever, not going crazy, whatever it might be. So find yourself a bunch of mentors and find yourself a peer group. So build your peer group, and the peer group can be about fun. It can be about the science that you're doing, whatever it is that you can be supportive, and make sure they're productive. I don't mean research productive. I mean, they don't bring you down with depression about how terrible the world is. But a peer group that are supportive and positive, I guess, to find those people to hang out with, and to make sure that you have fun, that it's what you're doing, that you stop and go, do I want to do this? Am I crushed by having to produce another successful grant application, another 5 papers a year? Or am I actually really enjoying it? And if you're not enjoying it and you're not happy, then be brave and find something else, because you don't want to spend your whole time, feeling that it's a competitive race and you're always running to stand still and it's miserable. Nobody wants to live like that. So yeah, find your peer group, be positive. You know, it's actually a pretty fun life being a researcher and an academic.
Great, thanks so much, Michelle. Such great reflections. I could, I would love to talk to you for hours. I think I might let you go and enjoy the rest of your evening. So thank you so much for your time, and congratulations again on this very well deserved sort of accolade for the work.
I was very thrilled. It was like the best email to get for like at least a year. So.
Yeah. And I've looked, for those of you, Michelle's written a blog post, which you'll see appear on the Journal of Ecology blog page, and then she's picked 12 of her papers that she's published in the journal, and they're all worth a read. I've been really enjoying going through all of them and getting really excited about reading them. So I'd urge you to do that. And they're, as you probably would have gleaned from this chat, they're quite diverse. So there'll be something for everyone. So thanks again, Michelle. Great speaking.